Thank you, Mr President, and thanks for sticking around tonight to hear the blazing insights that I'll have at 10:15 on a Monday evening. And I also want to thank the hard-working girls in the Whip's office, Charlotte and Beck. I know they're just as keen to hear those blazing insights. Mr President, I've racked up about 5 months in the job now, so I suppose I'm through probation. Haven't had a performance review from you yet, not that I'm complaining about that, but
it can be provided.
I wait with bated breath. But you know, you often get asked, "How do you find the job? How's it going?" And I often tell people the line I've got at the moment is that, well, you know, the hardest part of the job is the travel, and the best part of the job is the travel. And I have been able to be fortunate enough to travel around the great state of Queensland quite a bit in my first few months. It is hard because you're away from your family, but it's a great honour too, because you get to meet new people and hear about their issues and try and do your best to do something about them. And I just want to briefly outline a visit I made 2 weeks ago to Western Queensland. I went to Dalby, to Roma and to St George, and all of those places had their own issues and problems that needed addressing. I do particularly just want to focus on St George tonight. It's a place I know relatively well, having worked for a former member of this place, for Senator Barnaby, former Senator Barnaby Joyce, who used to live there. And they're undergoing a great change at the moment through the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. It's a town that's built on irrigation. It's a town or an area that God made to grow food and fibre. It's beautiful, rich soils, massive amounts of water flow through the Ballon River and bifurcate over the floodplains in that region. And the great engineering marvels that exist there to capture that overland flow and store it and then grow crops, grow rock melons, onions, wheat and of course cotton, provide thousands of jobs. It's about 5,000 people who live in that district, when you include Dirranbandi and Hebel as well, and there's an enormous amount of production. Some years up to $1 billion in agricultural production comes from that area. But at the moment we are reducing the amount of water used across the Murray-Darling Basin, including in this region. And that is hurting some of these towns, and we've always recognised that. We recognise that more water does have to go back to the environment, but it does come at a cost. Under the Basin Plan, about 100 gigalitres of water, or actually exactly 100 gigalitres of water, has to be reduced in use from the Condamine Ballon Basin, and that's actually a catchment that extends from up, well, near Toowoomba, just west of Toowoomba at Dalby and Oakey, all the way down to the border of New South Wales past Dirranbandi. And that will become more important as I talk about a few things. The government has already acquired 50 gigs, or just over 50 gigalitres of water, so about halfway there in that process. And when I went out there a couple of weeks ago, businesses are hurting in the district. They're hurting because of that water acquisition buyback. They use about 400, 450 a year, so 50 gigs is a sizeable, and that's from the whole basin, that's from the whole catchment. St George uses less than that. The 50 gigs has come from just below St George and St George. And that's had a huge impact on the businesses in those areas. And it's not the irrigators or the farmers that I know my Nationals colleagues and Senator Joyce, or former Senator Joyce, has the greatest concern for. It's not the farmers that are the issue. They get a check when they sell their water. They do so in a voluntary market, which the government pays for, and they can decide what to do with their lives after they sell that water. They can move to the Gold Coast if they like. They can diversify into other crops. The people that get left behind, they don't have a water licence, so the hotel owners, the tyre shop owners, the agronomists, the elders store, all these, the landmark, all those businesses don't get a cheque from the government, but their businesses rely heavily on the agricultural production that's underpinned in the region. So when you take the water away, you take the agricultural production away, and therefore you take the rug from underneath those businesses, and that's why they're hurting out there. And I just want to raise a few issues tonight that I've also raised with the Water Minister, although I think Senator Birmingham, and he's aware very strongly of these issues. But when we did put in place the plan, or when the former government put in place a plan, we in the coalition called for a cap on buybacks. Because of these costs of water buybacks from towns, we said that we should only buy back about half to two-thirds in water. The rest we should achieve through getting better and more efficient with water use. So we should line channels, we should laser level fields, we should deepen our water storages to reduce evaporation. All those things will still reduce water use and help the environment, but they'll also help keep that agricultural production there and keep businesses there. But of that 50 gigs that has been acquired from St George, only 4 gigalitres, only 4 out of the 50, less than 10%, has come from those water efficiencies so far. The other 46, or a little bit more than that, but working around numbers, the other 46 has come from water buybacks. That's why these people are hurting. So there does need to be, going forward, as the plan should be finalised by 2019, there does need to be a greater emphasis, in my view, in the Condamine-Ballon region on those water efficiencies. And that can happen. There is the potential to do those things. There is still the potential to make for deeper water storages. There's a dam there which a lot of water is stored in near St George called Beardmore Dam. Its average depth is just 2.5 metres. 2.5 metres, not much bigger than a suburban swimming pool, and not much deeper, sorry, than a suburban swimming pool. And that leads to a lot of evaporation. You get about 2 metres of evaporation a year in those areas. So if the dam is full at the start of the year and it doesn't rain, it'll be pretty much empty by the end of the year in St George. But instead of storing the dam, you can store in big ring tanks, which can be 8 metres high. The ring tanks are just basically above ground swimming pools, and they can build them up to 8 metres high very easily, and that will cut evaporation. We'll have a lower surface area or a smaller surface area and save water. There's also things that can be done with the Sunwater scheme there. Some more pipes can be put in. We can also do things to shepherd water down to. That's a very technical thing, but we can buy water upstream around Dalby and Chinchilla, and through the conversion and trading of licences right down the river, can still get that water down to where the environmental assets are. And I want to just talk briefly on those. The reason we're buying this 100 gigalitres of water is to effectively water two what's called key environmental assets, the Narran Lakes and the Colgale floodplain. Both of those, well, the Narran Lakes is in New South Wales, the Colgale floodplain is on the border between New South Wales and Queensland. So they're right down the bottom of that catchment. I said earlier the Condamine-Ballon catchment is a massive area, but they're right down the border. And the Murray-Darling Basin Authority has said in the past that the reason why they need to get all that water around St George is because their assets that they want to water are near St George. And there's no connectivity between what happens up at Chinchilla, which would be a good 300 odd kilometres away at least, and what happens down at the border. But in saying that, when the plan was signed, I remember very vividly this argument occurring, that all this water apparently had to come from down there, and the then, I think he is still the chair of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, Mr Craig Knowles, did promise the people of St George that no, not all of the water needs to come from St George. The vast majority of it does. He said about 80% does, but there is the potential to get 20% from upstream, because while that water may not get it down to the border that easily, it's still needed to help the macro and microinvertebrates that exist in the upper Condamine-Ballon system. Now that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened so far. There's been no water acquired from the upper Condamine-Ballon system, and in my view, in accordance with those promises and assurances that were given to the people of St George, that should happen now in the last few years of the plan. The final thing we can do, which does still need to be explored and will be in the 2016 review of the plan, is better environmental watering too, to water the Narran Lakes and the Colgale floodplain. We can become more efficient at doing that as well. These areas are large floodplains, and yes, we could water the environmental assets by just sending the water down the river, but there would be a lot of waste because a lot of that water then spreads over those floodplains and evaporates or seeps into the ground. But instead we could in a more targeted way direct that water or buy water at certain times to make sure we don't perhaps need as much as 100 gigs to get the same environmental impacts. Now, if we do all those three things, I think by concentrating on more water efficiencies, getting some water from upper Condamine, and also improving our environmental watering, I do think we can minimise the impact or the further impact on St George. I do want to see that town survive. It's a great little town. It's got 6 or 7 doctors that live there. It's a beautiful place for fishing. I was going to go jet skiing, water skiing was there. I didn't get a chance. A beautiful river. And I hope that we can help these communities survive and thrive in inland Australia. And the only way they're going to do that is by continuing to do what they're best at, which is growing food and fibre. There's not going to be jobs, not going to be thousands of jobs in ecotourism. They're not going to be able to diversify into local government or other issues. The only thing that's going to sustain that town is using the soil, the sun and the water that's God given us to grow food and create jobs.